Evelyn was late for work and missed her usual bus. Desperate, she caught the last bus of the night, a lonely, creaky vehicle that looked older than any bus she'd ever seen. The driver, a thin man with deep-set eyes, gave her a nod before driving off into the empty streets. As the bus rumbled down the road, Evelyn felt an unsettling chill creep through the air. As the bus moved further into the darkness, Evelyn noticed the route seemed unfamiliar. The streets grew quieter, the buildings taller, and there was an eerie silence. She glanced around, but she was the only passenger, the faint hum of the bus filling the air. The driver didn't speak a word, his hands tightly gripping the wheel. Suddenly, the door opened, and a few people boarded. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their eyes vacant and staring ahead. One woman in a long gray dress gave Evelyn a brief, cold look before sitting across from her. Despite the warmth of the bus, Evelyn shivered. Evelyn tried to ignore the other passengers, but her skin prickled as she felt their eyes on her. She turned to the window to look outside, but the streets were now deserted, as if time itself had stopped. In the reflection of the glass, she thought she saw faces, pale, gaunt, and watching her from the shadows. Her heart began to race. Suddenly, the bus's radio crackled to life. The distorted voice was faint, but Evelyn could make out one word: leave. The static drowned out the rest, but the message was clear. She looked to the driver, but he was staring ahead, unmoving, as if he hadn't heard anything. The bus came to an abrupt halt at an old, decrepit bus stop in the middle of nowhere. There was no sign of life, only an abandoned, overgrown station with broken benches and rusted metal. A strange, cold wind howled through the empty space, carrying whispers that sounded like soft laughter. Evelyn's stomach churned as she realized the bus wasn't going anywhere. A soft, creaking sound filled the air, and Evelyn glanced around. The strange passengers had shifted closer to her without making a sound. One of them, an elderly man, slowly turned his head toward her and whispered, "You shouldn't have gotten on." His breath was ice cold against her skin. The bus moved again, but the streets outside had become even more bizarre. The buildings now appeared to be frozen in time, with people from different eras caught mid-action. Some were walking, others were talking, but all were motionless. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened as she realized the bus was not only traveling through space, but also through time. The woman in the gray dress leaned forward and whispered, "There's no way out once you're on this bus." Evelyn's mind raced as she turned to the window again, seeing the same empty streets stretch on forever. The bus, now trapped in an eternal loop, seemed to mock her. The air grew heavier, suffocating. Evelyn turned to the driver, only to see his features now warped, his eyes black voids. The bus lurched forward, seemingly picking up speed on its own. She tried to shout at him, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. The other passengers remained eerily silent. As the bus sped through the endless stretch of road, the world outside began to vanish. The buildings and streets blurred, and the bus seemed to drive in nothingness, just endless black void. Evelyn gripped her seat, heart racing, as she realized she might be trapped in a place between worlds, somewhere unreachable. Suddenly, Evelyn saw something in the reflection of the window, her own face, but twisted and disfigured. It was as if a monstrous version of herself was staring back. The reflection grinned, but Evelyn didn't move. The real her was frozen in terror, unable to look away. A soft crying sound echoed from the back of the bus. Turning around, Evelyn saw a small child sitting alone, their face hidden behind long, dark hair. The child's cries grew louder, filled with despair, but there was no movement from the passengers. It felt like the sound was coming from everywhere. Evelyn's eyes darted around, now seeing the other passengers' faces were changing, distorting into grotesque, inhuman shapes. One of the men's eyes swelled to unnatural proportions, while another's face became skeletal. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. A scream formed in Evelyn's throat, but it was silent. Without warning, the bus came to a sudden halt, throwing Evelyn forward in her seat. The doors slammed open, and she saw nothing but an empty road stretching ahead, bathed in a faint, eerie glow. The bus felt as though it had reached its final destination. But where was that? The driver, now completely devoid of humanity, turned his head slowly to look at Evelyn. He opened the door, a chilling breeze flooding in. "It's time for you to leave," he said, his voice low and mechanical. Evelyn froze, unsure whether he meant the bus or something else entirely. Evelyn stood, her legs shaky, and moved toward the open door. Her heart pounded as the door seemed to pull her in, a force she couldn't resist. She stepped out onto the empty road, but the moment her foot touched the ground, the bus lurched away. She turned to see it speeding off, vanishing into the darkness. Evelyn stood alone in the middle of the road, the silence overwhelming. The bus was gone, but a faint, haunting sound lingered, like whispers carried on the wind. She looked around, but there was nothing to see, only an endless void stretching before her. Then she realized she was no longer sure if she was alive. As Evelyn stood motionless on the desolate road, a shiver ran down her spine. From the shadows of the surrounding darkness, something began to move, a faint, skeletal hand, its long fingers reaching out toward her from the void. It wasn't human, not anymore. The air seemed to thicken, and the ground beneath her feet felt less solid, as if she were standing on the edge of an abyss. The hand recoiled as Evelyn stepped back, her heart hammering in her chest, but the road ahead remained the same, an endless stretch of emptiness. Her vision blurred, the sky above swirling with black clouds and an eerie, oppressive fog that seemed to crawl along the ground. No matter which way she looked, the path extended infinitely in every direction. She was no longer sure if she had ever left the bus or if she had simply entered a nightmare with no end. Thanks for watching, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for more new videos.